So that is a great website because a lot of times these come from the state level of incentives. And in fact, New York State has a really excellent organization called NYSERDA. And NYSERDA is an acronym for New York State Energy Research and Development Agency. And their website is called Power Naturally, so it's kind of easy to remember. And NYSERDA develops all sorts of programs for renewable energy, and also very important companion is energy efficiency, which is, before we go out and build new plants and think about new ways to get power, why don't we think about how we don't have to use as much or what we may be wasting in our day-to-day activities. So those are 3 really good websites for you to look at, because you'll see great graphics and all the best information about where to get the money. And a lot of times, if you're thinking about a small scale production of energy, first of all, when you turn on your light switch, you don't have to pay for a power plant to be built. You just pay per month. You just pay that small amount that you spent that month. Whereas if you think about a solar panel, somebody needs to buy, install, and maintain that solar panel. And just because you want electricity, that doesn't mean you want to be in the business of being a power plant, right? So there's some different systems out there that are ways to get around that whole, I'm not in the business of being a power plant. I still just want to turn on my switch and use my coffee maker. These are called power purchasing agreements, and it's more like a type of contract. It's like renting a house versus buying a house, perhaps. You might think about it that way, which is to say, instead of having to fork out like $20,000 to put up a solar panel, what if you could go to a company and say, I want to have a house with a solar panel on top. You can use my real estate, my rooftop, for your solar panels. I just want to pay a monthly power bill. So you own the solar panels. I'll let you use my roof, and I'll pay for that power, but you take care of everything else. You talk to Con Ed and make sure that whole connection between the solar panels and the grid is sound, because that's actually a very technical, very important thing for an expert to figure out. You don't want to be tinkering with the power connection, right? So that's a new deal that is being developed, and big companies like Whole Foods and Walmart have been starting these power purchasing agreements. It's actually very effective for them, so that they can ensure they'll have solar panel. They don't have to pay so much money at the beginning, because again, they didn't want to be in the business of power. They wanted to sell food and clothes and whatever else. So that's a really good development in terms of policy. How do we make these renewable energy technologies more useful? When it comes to wind turbines, it's a little bit different. Again, I told you, maybe not for everybody's, not everyone's going to own a turbine. So you have to think about who would. And it may be people that own property that's in a windy spot, or that own property that's okay windy, but very close to people who want to demand power. So those are some different considerations about policy. I want to stop and let you ask questions, because we only have a limited amount of time.
I was gonna ask, wouldn't Chicago have thing, because isn't Chicago called the Windy City or something?
That's a great question. There's several. I've heard several versions of why Chicago is called the Windy City, and I think one of them is for the fast-talking politicians.
Yeah, that's the main one I've heard. So maybe they could pull it off, but.
But windy places it's interesting. And actually, I didn't bring a web address, but there is a new GIS mapping layer, if you've ever used that particular software, that EPA has issued to show you what is called the wind potential. And also they put out solar maps, so that shows solar potential. And so you can see how much wind is considered a valuable resource that you might potentially want to build a turbine there. And when it comes to wind, you need to have not just one windy day, it needs to be windy consistently. So you want to have wind most of the time, or at least enough time so that you're going to generate power. So that's kind of an interesting thing too. But the general rule of thumb is it needs to stick out above everything else. If you're flying a plane, the wind is where, is the point that's above everything else.
Now, right now, I think I was reading that there's no real way to store the energy. Like if you have like a windy week, you can't store that energy for the next month that's not windy.
Right. So storing, and the same thought is also applied to solar power, because of course it's sunny during a certain time of the day. Interestingly enough, there's battery hydro dams, and there's a fair number of them in Maine and in the Northeast. Actually, there are these tiny dams that basically pump water to the top of a hill or a mountain when there's a lot of extra power in the grid, like a sunny or a windy day, and then whenever they don't have that same source available to them, they just open the floodgates. The water comes out. It's like a battery because it has the potential energy of being at the top of a hill. And there you have like a water battery. So that's one type of battery that's built into the grid. But if you're thinking, a battery that's closer to your wind turbine or your solar, there are batteries that are developed. A lot of them are expensive. And when you look at wind and solar, some of the more expensive aspects of them are generally building a backup system for the day that's not sunny or the day that's not windy. So you may need to have some sort of generator that burns natural gas or something like that, or this battery, which there are batteries out there, but they tend to say there's not a great battery system just because it's expensive and it's not efficient, and it significantly, and you have to add that on top of the cost, right? So that's a good question.
My friend has hydropower as one of his as his alternate energy, and one question he took the negative impact because they build the dams, but the salmon can't go upstream. So what happened to them?
And that's a very good point. And so the salmon in the northwest of the United States have had a rough go because the Columbia River, which is a primary migration point for them, has been dammed in many ways. What they do is build these ladders, so the fish actually jump up these tiers of concrete where there's water rushing over it. It's actually really neat if you could ever see a video of it or go see them in person, because they kind of swim around and then one pops up and just jumps up the ladder. But that's kind of like what we call a Band-Aid, right? They don't have the run of the river, but they have like a ladder to get up. Very important, though, to the actual sustenance of the species. So dams do have some side effects, and so that's an important consideration that is considered with new dams. You don't see a lot of new dams being proposed these days, and in fact, across the country, a lot of dams, because there's so many small ones, are being decommissioned. So the number of dams in the United States is actually reducing over these, in recent decades, which is interesting. Not all of them were being used for power. Some of them they were just old, maybe 100 years old, and used for who knows what. But that isn't one side of hydropower, and a lot of kind of benefits and costs have to be assessed when it comes to a power plant. So that's an important question to ask when you're putting any type of installation in.
Some people say that global warming is not man-made but a natural occurrence. Others feel that it's the consequence of industrialization. What is your opinion?
Well, at the EPA, we recognize the consensus science of a consortium called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which actually became famous when a Nobel Prize was awarded in 2007. And this is the research of hundreds of scientists from around the world indicating that climate change is in fact man-made, or anthropogenic is the word they use, meaning caused, genocided or generated by humans.